I saw a statement from Senator Chris Murphy, I don't know, a week or so ago, and it said, and this is regarding the shutdown of USAID. It said the immediate consequences of this are cataclysmic. Anti-terrorism programs will shut down and our most deadly enemies will get stronger, right? That's what this senator said. Now, of the billions of tax dollars spent by the U.S. Agency for International Development that are being questioned now, millions of dollars, Mark, went to fund terrorism. And that's not my opinion. I'm going to now tell you the court cases that have been filed against charities and individuals who funneled money to terrorist groups. So it just shows the absurdity of a senator saying that shutting this down is actually going to hurt our fight against terrorism, when the reality is some of this money was going to fund terrorism. A multi-year investigation brought by the Justice Department and U.S. Attorney's Office for the District of Columbia reveals the scope of how funds were used in one recent terrorism-related case. The case represents one of the most significant diversions of USAID-funded humanitarian aid that USAID OIG, that's Office of Inspector General, has investigated. It involves a Syrian national, Mahmoud al-Hafian, who was charged with illegal diverting more than $9 million of taxpayer money through USAID to armed combatant groups, including the Al-Nusra Front, ANF, a designated foreign terrorist organization affiliated with Al-Qaeda in Iraq. According to the indictment, he ran an NGO, a non-governmental organization, and we got to get into that, Mark, and talk about what those are and how the U.S. government uses those to fund these things. And he managed 160 employees. Since Syria's civil war began in 2011 and through 2020, obviously we're in a different place today in 2025, right? U.S. taxpayers funded more than $12 billion of U.S. aid money to Syria, intended for food and medical supplies, that was supposed to be administered by the United Nations and by United Nations agencies and NGO. The NGO that this gentleman led received $122 million over 3 years. He diverted food kits meant for refugees to the actual terrorist commanders, according to the complaint. And this is an FBI counterterrorism case, right? This is the FBI and USAID OIG that investigated this. Some other examples of criminal cases regarding USAID funds: a former executive of digital consulting firm in Delaware agreed to pay $100,000 settlement to resolve allegations that he knowingly caused company employees to submit false claims to USAID in order to receive government contracts. It goes on, and we can get into some of these things, but how strange is it? How crazy is it that the U.S. government or USAID actually funded some operations where the money ended up going to terrorist groups? And there's criminal cases to prove that.
Mm-hmm. Well, I say strange is certainly one word. I would say look, you know me, the listeners know me. I've always been an advocate for the leanest, smallest government possible. Not no government, but the leanest government possible. And the reason is because government operations are made up of individual people, and individual people are flawed. Everybody is. And so when you start having these detached agencies like USAID, bad things are going to happen. When you don't have oversight, Bill, people are going to start engaging in a couple of things. They're going to start engaging in personal goals. In other words, their pet peeves, the things that they want to achieve that they think are important. And number two, they're going to start engaging in corrupt behavior. That is just human nature without oversight and without people who have incredibly strong character, otherwise without other oversight. So am I shocked by what we're finding out now? I am terribly shocked, but I'm not surprised.
A good way to put it. NGOs, Mark, NGOs, non-government organizations, how do you, just in general terms, before we get a little in the weeds with it, how do you feel about the government relying on them so heavily? Like, we'll hear about billions of dollars of aid going to Ukraine or wherever it's going to. And I don't know that the American people realize how that aid money is spent, that it's going to these kind of beltway bureaucratic organizations and from there, there's just layers of administrative fees stripped off of it, et cetera. What do you think about that whole premise of the U.S. government using NGOs now, so relying on them so heavily to do all this foreign policy stuff?
Well, listen, I am a believer in public-private partnerships to some degree, especially at local, maybe state levels. The problem is when you get to the federal government, when you're looking at, I think we have about 2 million government federal employees. When you look at these agencies, the leaders of whom, the directors of whom, the management of whom say that they don't have any accountability to Congress, that they don't have any oversight responsibility, you can't see our books. These are things that we're literally being told right now. When you don't have the accountability, when you don't have the oversight, things like this happen. So again, this is why I am in favor of the smallest possible government, just out of the necessities as articulated in the Constitution. But the more and more layers that you pile on, by the way, this is true in the private sector as well, Bill. The more layers you pile on, the more committees you have, the more think tanks you have, then the less the accountability and the further the separation from the taxpayer to the end product, quote unquote. So I am not a fan of NGOs because they are rife with abuse and fraud and illegality. Not always, but it's a huge possibility. And we're seeing this. The other thing I want to talk about with NGOs, Bill,
Yeah.
and you hit on this a little bit, it's, look, for lack of a better phrase, we're seeing this, the complexity here now with the revelations coming out of USAID. For lack of a better phrase, it's money laundering. It's money laundering because you have one GO working with another charity, and this money passes hands. You lay this out about the different layers here, but not only layers within one organization, it's going from one organization to another. And so the ability to track the taxpayer money is almost impossible. And so that's what we're seeing here. So I'm not a fan of it. And I think that what we're seeing now explains why.